Have you ever sat in your car long after the engine stopped, staring into nothing, and wondered, why do I feel so hollow, even though I've done everything right? You show up, you provide, you stay strong, and yet, deep inside, something aches. Not a loud scream, just a quiet, persistent numbness, like life is happening through you, but never quite to you. I used to think that was normal.
That being a man meant swallowing your pain, pushing through, and never letting the cracks show.
But the truth? That silence we carry inside. It doesn't make us stronger. It makes us strangers to ourselves. No one told us that emotional awareness isn't weakness. It's the beginning of becoming whole. In this journey, we're not talking about cliches. We're talking about what Carl Jung called the shadow, the anima, and the path to individuation, not some theory, but a lived transformation. By the end of this, you won't just understand emotions. You'll see why they've been your deepest teachers all along. Now let's begin with the first truth most men never say out loud. 1. The silence that breaks a man. Why emotional numbness feels like D. It doesn't start with a breakdown. It starts with functioning. Waking up to an alarm you didn't want to set. Putting on clothes that feel like armor. Smiling with a mouth that's forgotten how to mean it. It starts with being fine. He's a man everyone respects. He shows up, he works hard, he provides. But at night, lying in bed beside someone he no longer knows how to reach, he stares at the ceiling and wonders why he feels like a ghost in his own life. No one sees it, but he does. The slow, quiet corrosion of meaning. Not sadness, that would at least feel like something, but numbness. Why does it feel like I'm disappearing? Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But what happens when you don't even know who yourself is anymore? Emotional numbness is not an absence of feeling. It's the result of a lifetime of silencing those feelings. Every time you were told, "Man up," every time you were scolded for crying, every time you were laughed at for showing fear or softness, and so you adapted. You built a mask called stoic, but it didn't fit your soul. You learned to perform strength, but you forgot what strength even meant. The tragedy is this: most men who break don't break in public. They break in silence, at 2 a.m., alone, with no language for the sadness swelling in their chest, with no witness to the grief they never got to express, with no one who ever told them, "You're allowed to feel this." This is where emotional awareness begins, in the quiet devastation of a man who realizes he has spent his whole life living outside himself. And the body remembers what the mind tries to suppress. The tension in your jaw, the migraines, the back pain, the insomnia. They aren't random. They are your soul screaming through the only language left, the body. But no one talks about this, because in our world, men are told their worth is measured in how much they can suppress, how long they can hold the weight, how well they can smile through it, how little they need, how quickly they can bounce back, how emotionless they can remain, even when life is tearing them apart. And what happens to a man who has no space to feel? He detaches. Not just from his pain, but from his joy. He stops laughing from his belly. He stops crying at beauty. He stops dreaming. He forgets how to be alive. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So many men walk around thinking it's fate that they feel this dead inside, not realizing it's a choice they never knew they were making. To feel nothing, just to survive. But that choice comes at a cost, because what you suppress doesn't disappear. It waits, and if you don't meet it willingly, it will meet you eventually, through heartbreak, through illness, through isolation, through breakdown. The good news, if you're here and you feel this, You're not broken. You're waking up. And what comes next is the truth about where this all began. Not in your adulthood, but in your childhood. 2. Wounded by the father. The inheritance of emotional repression. There's a moment, so subtle you might not even remember it, when a boy first learns that his feelings are dangerous. Maybe he cried after falling down and his father scowled. "You're fine, don't be weak." Maybe he reached for comfort, but his dad was too lost in his own stress to respond. Maybe he watched his father implode silently, never talking about what was wrong, always pretending everything was under control, until one day it wasn't. That's how the inheritance begins. Not in words, but in silences, in the looks, in the withdrawn presence, in the way affection felt conditional, based on performance, obedience, toughness. Carl Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And for many men, that burden is emotional muteness passed down like a sacred rule. We grow up thinking our father's way of handling pain is the way. Stoicism, control, deflection, distraction. We mistake absence for strength, distance for dignity. But the truth is, your father may have been emotionally wounded too. He might never have had the tools. He might have been raised by a man who taught him love is earned, not given. That crying is weak. That softness is shameful. That being a real man means you endure silently, no matter how much you bleed inside. So what did you do? You adapted. You learned how to numb early, how to harden, how to suppress anything that might make you vulnerable in front of him or anyone else. Because love felt conditional and emotions risked rejection. So you built walls. But the tragedy of those walls is that they don't just keep out pain, they keep out love too. The father wound isn't just about having a harsh or absent dad. It's about growing up with a model of masculinity that teaches you that your worth is only as real as your ability to hide what hurts. And even now, as an adult, that script still runs in the background. You flinch when someone asks, "How are you really?" You withdraw when you feel too much. You judge yourself for your own sadness, shame, and fear. Because somewhere deep inside, your father's voice still echoes. Man up. But what if healing doesn't come from confronting him, but from finally listening to the boy inside you, the one who was never allowed to feel? Because that boy still lives in your chest. He's still waiting for someone, anyone, to say, "You're allowed to hurt. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to be loved without earning it." And maybe it starts with you. Emotional awareness begins when you stop blaming your father and start grieving the version of you that molded himself in silence just to survive. This grief is sacred. It's the doorway back to your full humanity. Because only when you face where the wound began, can you stop passing it on. And what keeps the wound alive? The mask you wear to cover it. 3. The mask of the strong man. When the persona becomes your coffin. There is a moment in a man's life when he realizes that the very traits that earned him praise have become the bars of his prison. Discipline, stoicism, the ability to get things done. He was told these were virtues, and for a while they worked. He climbed ladders. He gained respect. He became dependable. But somewhere along the way, he lost something essential, something so human, it almost feels forbidden to name it: the right to feel. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world. It's not false, it's not fake, it's functional. But when the mask becomes fused with the face, when a man forgets who he is beneath the image, the persona becomes a coffin, not a costume. And yet, we applaud it. We tell boys to be strong, but not sensitive, to be brave, but never afraid, to lead, but never question. From childhood, they are taught that feeling is a liability, especially if it's visible. And so, they build their lives around this unspoken commandment: do not be vulnerable. Every interaction becomes a performance, every smile a rehearsal, even their confidence rehearsed, even their silence practiced. And in that process, they become strangers to themselves. They begin to confuse who they are with how they are seen. That's when the soul begins to decay, not all at once, but inch by inch, in the quiet moments when no one's watching and the mask becomes too heavy to hold. The irony is, society reveres this mask. Men who hold it well are rewarded. They're called leaders, rock solid, unshakable. But deep down, they're often exhausted, not from work, but from pretending. Because the mask requires constant upkeep. It doesn't allow for messiness. It doesn't allow for uncertainty. It doesn't allow for softness. And when the inevitable cracks start to show, anxiety, irritability, emptiness, even explosive anger, no one knows what to do with it, not even the man himself, because he's been taught that being strong means never falling apart. And so when he starts to crumble, even privately, he thinks he's failing. He thinks something is wrong with him. He doesn't realize this is the exact moment Jung would call the invitation to individuation, the moment when the self begins to rise against the tyranny of the persona. But there's a deep fear in removing the mask. Who am I if I'm not the strong one? Who will love me if I stop performing? What if there's nothing beneath this mask but a hollow man? These are not easy questions. They are sacred ones, and they must be faced alone. Because emotional awareness isn't a social movement. It's a personal reckoning. It's the process of realizing that the strong man the world celebrates is often a man who's grieving in silence, who's tired of being admired for how little he seems to feel. The mask served its purpose. It protected you, but it cannot love you. It cannot nourish your soul, and it cannot bring you home to yourself. To remove it is not to be weak. It is to be brave in the deepest sense. Because beneath that mask lies everything you were once told to suppress. Your sorrow, your tenderness, your hunger to be seen for something more than what you do. And once you touch that truth, the real transformation begins. Because what lies underneath isn't shameful. It's sacred. The world taught you to hide it, but your soul has been waiting for you to reclaim it. The next step on this path isn't about retreating from strength. It's about redefining it. 4. Emotional awareness is a warrior's skill. Strength was never meant to be the absence of emotion. It was meant to be the capacity to hold it. But somewhere along the way, men were taught that feeling makes them weak, that pain is a sign of failure, and that vulnerability is a liability. So instead of developing emotional resilience, they developed emotional avoidance. But that's not strength. That's survival. And survival is not living. The real warrior isn't the man who hides his heart. It's the man who walks into it, who faces grief, fear, shame, and doubt, and doesn't flinch. Emotional awareness is not softness. It's courage. The courage to say, this hurts and I'm staying with it. Not running, not numbing, just staying. Because to feel fully is to be alive, and to feel deeply is to finally begin the journey of becoming whole. When you allow your emotions to speak, without silencing them, without trying to fix them, you don't lose control. You gain truth, and that truth becomes your compass. Your anger becomes direction. Your sadness becomes honesty. Your joy becomes fuel. This isn't weakness. This is warriorship of the soul. 5. The shadows whisper when your emotions turn against you. You can only bury your emotions for so long before they start to leak through the cracks. Maybe it's the sudden anger you can't explain, the outburst over something small, the cold distance you create without knowing why. This is not random. This is your shadow speaking. Carl Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we repress, reject, or deny, especially the emotions we've labeled as unacceptable. But buried doesn't mean gone. It means hidden and festering. When you refuse to face what's inside, your emotions turn on you. The sadness you won't feel becomes depression. The fear you won't name becomes control. The rage you suppress becomes self-destruction, or worse, violence toward others. This isn't because you're broken. It's because your soul is demanding to be heard. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your unloved truth waiting to be integrated. And if you're willing to listen, truly listen, it will lead you not into darkness, but into depth, into the place where healing begins. 6. The anima within. How emotionally aware men love without fear. There's a part of every man that longs to feel, to open, to soften, to connect without armor. Jung called this the anima, the inner feminine, the emotional, intuitive, relational side of a man's psyche. But most men are taught to exile this part of themselves. To be emotional is to be weak. To be nurturing is to be unmanly. And so they love with one hand tied behind their back, able to provide, protect, and possess, but not to receive. The emotionally aware man reclaims his anima, not by becoming less masculine, but by becoming more whole. He begins to see that true intimacy requires exposure. He learns that love cannot flourish in the presence of fear, and he discovers that to be vulnerable is not to lose control, but to gain depth. When a man integrates his anima, he becomes capable of loving without domination, listening without fixing, and showing up without disappearing. He no longer fears emotion, he welcomes it as sacred. 7. When the heart speaks louder than the mind. We've been trained to trust logic above all else, rationality, control, thought. But the mind can lie. It can overthink, deflect, justify. The heart, on the other hand, speaks in truth, in sensations, in tears, in quiet knowing. Emotional awareness means learning to listen not just to what you think, but to what you feel. And sometimes what you feel contradicts the life you've built. That contradiction is sacred. It's not confusion, it's awakening. The mind might say, you should stay, but the heart whispers, you're dying here. The mind argues, but the body weeps. And in those moments, it is not insanity. It is your soul trying to speak through feeling. Emotional awareness isn't about being ruled by emotion. It's about trusting that your heart carries wisdom. Your mind was never taught to understand. And the more you listen, the clearer your path becomes. 8. The pain of awakening. When you outgrow the men around you. Emotional growth doesn't always feel like expansion. Sometimes it feels like isolation. As you begin to feel more, express more, question more, something unsettling happens. The men you once felt close to begin to feel distant. Conversations that once flowed now fall flat. Jokes feel shallow. Gatherings feel empty. You're still there, but something in you has shifted, and the old masks no longer fit. This is the pain of awakening. It's not that you're better than them, it's that you've started walking a different path. One where silence isn't strength, where numbness isn't noble, where emotional depth matters more than appearance. And for a while, it can feel like loneliness. But this loneliness is not a punishment, it's a clearing, a sacred shedding of old skins to make room for the kind of connection your soul is now hungry for. Brotherhood rooted not in bravado, but in truth. 9. Tears, symbols, and synchronicity. The language of the soul. When a man starts to feel again, the world begins to speak to him differently, not through facts or logic, but through symbols. a song that moves him to tears, a dream that won't leave his mind, a random moment that feels strangely meaningful. Jung called these moments synchronicities, not coincidences, but whispers from the unconscious, guiding us back to something deeper. Emotions are the gateway to that deeper world. They are not distractions, they are directions. A tear is not just a tear, it's a message. A gut feeling is not just instinct, it's inner wisdom. The emotionally aware man doesn't just analyze life, he listens to it. He allows his sadness to paint, his fear to write, his joy to sing. Because through these expressions, the soul speaks, and when you learn to hear it, everything changes. 10. You are not broken, you are becoming. There comes a point in the journey where everything hurts, and the only thought left is, what's wrong with me? The old life feels fake. The old friendships feel distant. The armor you wore for decades is cracking. And all that's underneath is raw, uncertain, tender. It's easy to think you're falling apart, but you're not. You're waking up. This isn't the end of your strength. It's the beginning of your becoming. Carl Jung said, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. What you feel right now, the confusion, the grief, the loneliness, it's not failure. It's the soul gathering its missing pieces. The man who feels deeply, hurts openly, and dares to question everything he was told, is not broken. He is on the path of individuation, the sacred journey back to his full, embodied, emotional, divine self. There is no map for this, no finish line, no applause, but there is truth, and there is freedom. The more you feel, the more you heal, and the more you heal, the more you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And now, the real journey begins.